Hello everyone. Welcome to Invensis YouTube channel. In today's session, we will learn about the Scrum framework. But before we dig in, let's quickly take a look at the agenda. We will begin the session with a brief overview of the Agile methodology. After that, we will answer the question, what is Scrum? Then we'll take a look at the benefits of Scrum. Post that, we will discuss the basics of Scrum such as Scrum Roles, Scrum artifacts, and Scrum ceremonies. Finally, we will conclude this session by discussing how the Scrum process actually works. So, let's get started. Organizations often get stuck when deciding on which development methodology to choose. Making this decision can get tricky due to the two major development methodologies at play. In simple terms, a development methodology determines how the actual tasks of a project are organized and acted on. The two main development methodologies are waterfall and agile. The waterfall methodology incorporates a stepwise approach to project development. The project's progress flows downward through all the phases, similar to a waterfall. In the waterfall methodology, the sequence of events is something like gathering and documenting requirements, design, implementation, verification and testing, and at last, fixing the issues and delivering the product. Each phase generally finishes before the next one can begin. While the waterfall model has its merits, its potential drawbacks such as less customer involvement, difficulty to include new requirements, the last-minute testing has led organizations to use Agile methodology. Agile is an iterative, adaptable, time-boxed, and team-based approach to managing a project. It allows you to break down a large project into easier and convenient tasks that are accomplished in short iterations. These iterations are referred to as sprints. Agile introduces many benefits that are not possible in the waterfall model, such as early delivery, predictable cost, high customer satisfaction, ease of including new requirements, and many more. Agile is an umbrella term for several iterative and incremental software development approaches. The most popular Agile frameworks include Scrum, Extreme Programming, Lean, Crystal, Feature-Driven Development, and many others. While each of these has its own unique qualities, they all incorporate the principles of Agile when developing a product. Among all of the Agile variations, Scrum is by far the most popular and widely adopted Agile methodology. So, what is Scrum? Scrum is a framework for developing, delivering, and sustaining complex products. It works by breaking down large products and services into small pieces that can be completed by a cross-functional team in a short time frame. Scrum is a lightweight framework that is used to deliver complex, innovative products and services that truly delight customers. It is simple to understand with a set of principles and values, but difficult to master. To learn about the history of Scrum, we have to go back to the year 1986. In the year 1986, two management experts Hirotaka Takeuchi and Ikujiro Nanaka introduced the term Scrum. They published a study in the Harvard Business Review which explained that empirical evidence suggests that small cross-functional teams produce the best results. They borrowed the name Scrum from the game of rugby, to stress the importance of teamwork to deal with a complex problem. In 1993, Jeff Sutherland implemented the first Scrum project at the Easel Corporation. After that, software developers Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland each came up with their own version of Scrum, which they presented at a conference in Austin, Texas in 1995. Though Scrum has its roots in the technology and software industries, there are no limits as to in which field of work it can be used. For example, universities use Scrum to deliver valued projects to clients. Militaries have relied on Scrum to prepare ships for deployment. Scrum is used extensively worldwide. According to the 14th Annual State of Agile report by version 1, companies that have adopted the Scrum framework have stated the benefits of adopting Scrum, such as increased ability to manage changing priorities or user requirements, better visibility into projects, increased quality of products, faster delivery time to market, more alignment between business and IT, faster return on investment, reduced project cost, and many others. Scrum processes enable organizations to adjust smoothly to rapidly changing requirements and produce a product that meets evolving business goals. So, whether you're working on the next smartphone app, or managing logistics for a store, or planning a charity event, you should take a closer look at using Scrum. Now that you know what Scrum is, let us try to understand the people, artifacts, and events that are part of Scrum framework. Let's begin with Scrum Roles. The three roles defined in Scrum are the Scrum Master, the Product Owner, and the Development Team. The people who fulfill these roles work together closely, on a daily basis, to ensure the smooth flow of information and the quick resolution of issues. Scrum teams are self-organizing and cross-functional. They choose how best to accomplish their work, rather than being directed by others outside the team. Let's briefly go through these 3 roles. Product owner. The product owner defines what the product will look like and what features it should contain. He or she keeps track of the project's stakeholders' expectations, defines and gathers the required tools and resources that the Scrum team needs. In addition, the product owner communicates project vision to the team to help set priorities. Scrum Master. Scrum Master is the coach and the gatekeeper of the Scrum team. In simple terms, he or she helps the Scrum team perform at their highest level. Scrum Master does this by ensuring that everyone in the team understands Scrum theory, practices, rules, and values. He or she also protects the team from both internal and external distractions. Development team. The development team consists of professionals who do the hands-on work of developing and testing the product put forth by the product owner. This team tends to be made up of several members that are cross-disciplinary, including engineers, designers, architects, and testers. Development teams are structured and empowered by the organization to organize and manage their own work. Next up, let's look at the artifacts that are used during a Scrum process. Scrum defines 3 artifacts: product backlog, sprint backlog, and a potentially releasable product increment to help manage work. These artifacts are designed to maximize the transparency of key information so that everybody has the same understanding of the artifact. Let's briefly go through Scrum artifacts. Product backlog. The product backlog is an ordered list of everything that is known to be needed in the product. The product backlog lists all features, functions, requirements, enhancements, and fixes that constitute the changes to be made to the product in future releases. Therefore, it is constantly evolving and is never complete. The product owner is responsible for the product backlog, including its content, availability, and ordering. Sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is the collection of product backlog items that the team commits to achieve in a given sprint. The sprint backlog makes visible all the work that the development team identifies as necessary to meet the sprint goal. Product increment. According to Scrum Guide, the increment is the sum of all the product backlog items completed during a sprint and the value of the increments of all previous sprints. It is a step toward a vision or goal. The increment must be in usable condition regardless of whether the product owner decides to release it. Apart from these 3 artifacts, there is another one called the sprint burndown chart. It is a graphical way of showing how much work is remaining in the sprint, typically in terms of task hours. A sprint burndown, or burn-up, chart is not an official Scrum artifact, but many teams use it to communicate and track progress toward the sprint goal during the sprint. It is typically updated at the daily Scrum. Moving on, let's explore the Scrum events, which are often referred to as Scrum ceremonies. Prescribed events are used in Scrum to create regularity and transparency in the organization. All events are time-boxed events, which means that every event has a maximum duration. You might be wondering what exactly is a sprint, right? Let me answer that for you. The sprint is a time box of 1 month or less during which the team produces a potentially shippable product increment. Sprints have consistent durations throughout a development cycle, and a new sprint starts immediately after the conclusion of the previous sprint. Scrum defines 4 events, sometimes called ceremonies, that occur inside each sprint: sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. Let us explore what these events are one by one. Sprint planning meeting. During sprint planning, the entire Scrum team collaborates and discusses the work to be performed in the sprint. The Scrum Master ensures that the event takes place and that attendants understand its purpose. Sprint planning typically answers 2 questions. What needs to be achieved in the upcoming sprint? How the team will successfully deliver the identified product backlog items as part of a potentially shippable product increment. Daily Scrum, daily stand-up. The daily Scrum is a 15-minute time-boxed event for the development team. As the name goes, this meeting takes place every day during a sprint. The development team uses the daily to assess its progress toward completing the work in the sprint backlog. Sprint review. A sprint review is held at the end of the sprint to inspect the product increment and update the product backlog if needed. During the sprint review, the Scrum team and stakeholders collaborate about what was done in the sprint. Based on the feedback, they update the product backlog as needed. So, the result of the sprint review is a revised product backlog that defines the probable product backlog items for the next sprint. Sprint retrospective. During the sprint retrospective, the team reflects upon how things went during the previous sprint and identifies adjustments and improvements they could make going forward. The sprint retrospective occurs after the sprint review and prior to the next sprint planning. While sprint reviews focus on the product, sprint retrospectives focus on the process. So, now you guys have an idea of what Scrum is, the people, artifacts, and events involved in the Scrum process. Let us now see how a typical sprint life cycle looks like in Scrum and how Scrum works in general. At its core, Scrum is a framework that allows development teams the flexibility to respond to changing situations. The Scrum process consists of a series of sprints, where the end result is a potentially shippable product increment. Step 1. The Scrum process starts with a backlog. The product owner creates a product backlog, which is a list of specifications from the client or end users. Using input from all the stakeholders, which essentially means anyone who has an interest in the results of your project, all the requirements are entered into the backlog as user stories. Each story is then broken down into tasks that are required to achieve the goal, and these tasks are then prioritized. Step 2. After the backlog is finalized, the product owner and development team conduct sprint planning. During sprint planning, the team pulls a small chunk from the top of product backlog items to work on during the sprint. That chunk becomes the sprint backlog. As the sprint progresses, the development team performs the work necessary to deliver the selected product backlog items. Step 3. On a daily basis, the development team coordinates their work in a daily Scrum. Along the way, the Scrum Master helps the Scrum team perform at their highest level and make smooth progress toward their sprint goal. Step 4. At the end of each sprint, the development team delivers a functioning piece of the product to show for their work. The development team holds a sprint review to demonstrate what they have accomplished during the sprint. Any stakeholders, senior managers, and other affected departments such as marketing, customer support, and others are invited to attend and give feedback. Based on the feedback from the internal as well as external stakeholders, the product backlog is updated. Step 5. After the sprint review, the team gathers for a sprint retrospective, to discuss what went right, or wrong, and areas for improvements for further sprints. They make tangible plans for how to improve their own process, tools, and relationships. Unlike in the sprint review, where the focus is on the product, in sprint retrospectives, the focus is on the process. Step 6. As the next sprint begins, the team chooses another chunk of the product backlog and begins working again. Beyond the sprint, the cycle repeats until enough items in the product backlog have been completed, the budget is depleted, or a deadline arrives. This way, Scrum ensures that the most valuable work has been completed by the time the project ends. So, in a nutshell, this is how a typical Scrum process looks like. Essentially, the Scrum framework presents practices to break down complex problems using simple methods. It quickly rose to fame because of its simplistic brilliance and applicability to all kinds of work, not just software development. So, has this spiked your interest? Are you planning to be a Scrum Master? We can help. At Invensis Learning, we provide Scrum Alliance accredited certified Scrum Master training worldwide. Enroll now and take the next step in your pursuit to master Agile. For more updates on trending technologies, subscribe to Invensis Learning YouTube channel. Also, if you have any queries, share them with us in the comments section.